Yeah. Hi, how are you? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Dr. Morote from John Jay College, and we have another interview of Graduate Power. In this interview, we want to learn more about our alumni, but also more about our professors. And we have two wonderful gentlemen today. We have Professor Heath Brown. He's from public management. Before we learn more about him, and we have Julius Caranda. Julius Caranda is our alumni, and he have very interesting life because he's a business specialist at New York Office of Cannabis Management. And Dr. Heath Brown, he's an associate professor of public management. And I am Dr. Elsa-Sofia Morote, also from John Jay Public Management. So let's begin. Julius, tell us your story. Tell us about you. How do you are in that position? When you graduated, we want to know everything about what you did after you left us.
No, thank you so much, Dr. Morote, and it's great to be on the panel with you, Professor Brown. It's so for me, my journey obviously started with John Jay being a alumni of the school. Went here for undergrad and for my master's degree, undergrad in criminal justice, and a graduate degree from public administration. Uh, you know, it's like a lot of students when they were about to graduate from with their bachelor's degree, really wasn't sure what I wanted to do, even though I chose a degree I chose, but wasn't really sure. Was I commute, John Jay's a community school, so I had a between the time of being a full time student, I worked various part time jobs. So I had some experience there, but not the full time work experience. So with that being said, what I decided to do was go to pursue my master's degree and then also do an official internship. And I did an internship at the New York City Council for one summer, the summer after I graduated from my undergrad, and that gave me the level of exposure to, officially work in a um, uh, I would say a government service, public service environment. Previously, I was working at like Rite Aid and Time Warner Cable. These this entry level type of jobs, right? Um, and from that internship, I was able to leverage that to get a job at J.P. Morgan Chase. Um, and I also found that job as an opportunity through the John Jay Career Fair. So, for those students that are listening, definitely take advantage of those careers fairs that happen, I believe, at least once a year, if not every semester, right? So that was how I got my start into my professional career. Um, Bounced around a little bit from there in terms of just other opportunities. I worked for a couple of federal contractors doing background investigations for federal clearances. Ended up back into the banking space working for HSBC's private bank. And then I went to be an anti-money laundering investigator at Standard Chartered Bank. Throughout that time, I was on and off with school. And in terms of my master's program, I was kind of, taking breaks and coming back and trying to balance it all while working simultaneously. And then, eventually I did complete my master's in about 2018. Um, and once I did that, I realized I was like, okay, I can maybe make a pivot because I had all this corporate experience for the last, what was it, 6, 7 years from graduating. I can now leverage, this master's in public administration into getting back into the public service arena. So I actually kept in contact with my supervisor from my internship at the city council. And he let me know that there was a position open at the city council. And that's what I ended up doing. I ended up going back there to work full time. And while I also did that, I also pursued teaching and became an adjunct professor at BMCC, leveraging my master's degree. And yeah, that was a pivotal moment for me because it just also allowed me, it let me know that it didn't have to be a one-track thing. I didn't just have to be, working full-time, always in I can also pursue other interests and then get paid for it outside of my normal working duties, right? Um, After that, I worked at city council for about 5 years. Was teaching, doing some other like projects in the community, um, in different areas of community, working with young people, just really just doing a lot of service related work, which ultimately ended up kind of leading me down this path to where I'm at the Office of Cannabis Management. Because a lot of the work that we do is business economic development, but it's rooted in social economic equity. So when the MRTA, which is the Marijuana Taxation Act, was passed back in 2021, it was rooted in providing equity to those who have been disproportionately impacted by the prohibition of cannabis. And that's a team that I work on, where our whole mission is implementing the legislation, the MRTA, to make sure that folks who have been impacted by these harmful drug laws are able to leverage and work in this from a legal standpoint, right? If you've been arrested or have been marginalized for your either use or distribution of marijuana, you can now have the ability to sell it legally with a license, and that's a lot of the work that we do. So we do a lot of business development work. So that's coming up with programming to either help people get a license, like application support, or after they get a license, working with and developing programs that will help them succeed or potentially help them succeed. So like creating incubators, business incubators, creating business accelerators, access to capital through banking options, low cost loans, low interest loans. These are the type of things that we are involved in making sure that folks can enter this brand new market, because cannabis was only legalized 3 years ago. Our office was only created 2 years ago. So it's brand spanking new. We are very much building the plane as we fly it, type of scenario. And it's super interesting. I can't, it's not even a thing I can say. I can tell anyone, hey, do this, do that, because there's no blueprint for it. It's literally being made right now. We are creating the blueprint. So for all those students that are interested in the space, there's information out there, but very much more to come down the pipeline. So hopefully that was just I was
Well,
giving.
that's excellent, Julius. We will go back again to ask you more questions or more details of your job. It's interesting that you showing us everything that was a student, no? Sometimes needed to work part-time, full-time, they needed to internship in between, full-time in between, but you are able to do it. So let's talk about Dr. Heath Brown. Tell us um, what the master's does, and what do you courses you teach, what do you do. Tell us about your research. We want to know what the professor is doing, what is behind the professor.
Sure. It's such a pleasure. It's such a pleasure to have heard that. Such a fascinating story of one of our great alums. I would say that was an unusual story, except for it's so common. Your fascinating stories, and I know you know this, is what so many of your other alums would tell. And that's the biggest difference I found between being on the faculty here at John Jay College and the other programs that I've taught at. I've had great students at other universities and great universities, but those students haven't been interesting. And as a member of the faculty, part of what gets me so excited about teaching the classes and being involved with students is just how interesting each student is and how they bring so much of their background to class. And that means it's a great privilege to be in the position that I'm in. I'm a born and bred New Yorker, born in Brooklyn, grew up in Brooklyn, and had the great fortune to come back home after living and working in Washington, D.C. for about a decade. I did what a lot of people did after college. I moved to Washington to go work for a member of Congress. I worked for a member of Congress from New Jersey named Donald Payne. Donald Payne, at the time, was the head of the Congressional Black Caucus. And I had the pleasure to be a part of his staff. It's my very, very first job. And the things you learn in that very first job that stick with you. One of the things I learned most from that very, very first job was the importance of writing. One of the things that Congressman Payne, who passed away a couple of years ago, insisted upon is that if he ever went to an event, whether it was a committee hearing in Congress, whether it was the opening of a supermarket in his district in Newark, he always had to have prepared comments. He respected his constituents so much that he would never show up and just shoot from the hip. He always was going to be prepared. And what that meant for his very small staff is everybody was always writing. He didn't have a huge staff, and so even me, who was just a lowliest of interns in the office, had to write. So I had to take what I'd learned in college and really apply it very quickly. That was the ability to write. But I knew that my ability to write wasn't nearly what it should be. And so I went to graduate school. I went to graduate school in Washington, D.C., finished that degree, but I worked the whole way through. I worked at organizations. I worked as a lobbyist. I worked for the Congressional Budget Office. Last job that I did was the research director for an organization called the Council of Graduate Schools, where I represented, in many ways, all of you that are interested in graduate school. I was interested in advocating for equitable policies for graduate students, full funding for graduate fellowships, support for students across fields in some of the most important areas that this country cares about. But when I left Washington, I left with one question in my mind, which is, for all that I had done in Washington, every 4 to 8 years, there was a transition of power. In fact, we're having one right now. And despite feeling like I was really in the know, I left Washington thinking I was a real insider. I didn't know a thing about what happened when one president left and a new president came to power. And so when I left Washington, I took that up as my research agenda, and that's what I write about to this day. I write about what happens to government, what happens to public personnel, what happens to people who are full-time permanent members of the career staff at offices across Washington and elsewhere, and what happens to the political appointees, the people who are in charge with making the policy decisions across the federal government. Many of those people actually work in New York City. It's not exclusively something that happens in Washington, D.C. And so I've taken this up as the research agenda that I pursue. I wrote a book a couple of years ago and wrote a book just about 3 months ago about the Joe Biden and Kamala Harris transition, book that was published in June. It's been a pleasure over the last couple of months to be able to engage in this topic. In fact, just today I was on CNN talking about what's happening right now. We have another transition. As everybody knows, Donald Trump won re-election, and what that means for people who are working in government. Many people probably who are interested in pursuing a master's degree is pretty consequential. And I think it's important for us to understand what happens during these crucial, critical, sometimes even scary times when the world seems to be changing very, very quickly. I think it's important for people who are in positions of expertise to be able to weigh in, contribute sound analysis, fact-based information, the kind of impartial, independent understanding of the world that we live in, so that the current concerns we all have about social equity, about justice, about living in a world that's fair to everyone, are maintained regardless who's in the White House, regardless who's the governor, regardless who's the mayor. And so I try to bring that to my classes. And so every class I teach touches on some of the things that I study, but more importantly, it taps into the things that our students are interested in. And those are so incredibly varied and surprising. I think that we look at our graduate programs in a very specific way. This is a way for me to get from point A to point B. Best advice I could give any incoming student to the John Jay program is to enjoy yourself. Enjoy yourself in the program. What happens between A and B, between the degree and that job that you seek out there, should be a lot of fun. You should learn a lot. You should meet people. You should form friendships and connections and relationships. Because once you're out there in the world again, it's those connections that matter so much. Julius, you mentioned the connections that you've maintained. Those networks, those connections need to be strong. They need to be developed. They need to be nurtured so that once you leave the program continues to pay dividends for you. It's something that we're committed to as a program to make sure that students are served not just while they're here, but also once they're gone. It's one of the reasons we do these things and reasons why we invite alumni back in to show students that there is a future. But once you're a bloodhound, you're always a bloodhound. And as a faculty, we're very committed to that. And so that's a little bit about me.
Thank you very much. I think it's fascinating to learn about your book. The Professor Heath Brown writes beautifully. I will advise you to read it. Even his emails is like tons of expression, and it's amazing how he expressed himself in the written word, of course, in the talking in the other word. And we appreciate everything that you do for your students. Julius, talking about courses, can you go back the time you were a student? Do you remember which courses do you have that you believe were useful for the position you are right now, or which struggles, or which was your favorite? What do you remember in your time as a student in the MPA program?
No, that's a great question. So I'm going to shout out Dr. Judy Lynn Peters.
Mm-hmm.
She's definitely still to this day. Every chance I get, I stop by her office or we run into each other. We talk. She taught me 700, PAD 700, I believe. I think, and those who know Dr. Peters, she definitely has a reputation for being tough. But I always took it as it came from a good place, and she always wanted you to do your best. And for me, what was really important that I got out of that course was that she was able to relate it to real world topics. So as Professor Brown just mentioned, obviously the political atmosphere that we're currently in, just the different government bureaucracies and technicalities that happen, from the local level to the levels of the state government, to levels of the president, the executive level, and the federal government. These things are not only they're not just theory. These things have real life implications. And I think Dr. Peters was able to, for me at least, draw those lines very well, and I took a lot of that stuff. I still, I utilize today. I work for the state government. Before this, I was at the local level at the city council. Many of these things that I felt, I may have learned, and there's other professors as well. There's other courses that took, but that one just stands out off the top of my head. But there are many of them that to this day, I'm utilizing. I still probably will. Right. This is not, my career is still going on. I'm still going through this journey, and I believe that, I will be utilizing the MPA as long, even if I'm no longer in government. So.
Yeah, I actually teach that class of Dr. Julie Lins. I mean, she designed the class. It's intense. That class is intense, not only for the students, but also for the professors who have to read all the work and, analyze the critical thinking. You develop that critical thinking. And I like the journals a lot. I enjoy reading the journals of my students when they read all those chapters and meditate what happened, 100, 200 years ago, and how these things relate with the politics right now. It's amazing because you did a good pick. Dr. Brown, what, talking about the courses and the skills we acquired inside of the MPA, what kind of skills a new student will need to be part of the MPA program?
There's so many that I think a student needs to have. But thankfully, I think most students applying to the program have those. I think the way that we do our admission system is so inclusive and so accepting of the lived experience that generates the kinds of skills that can be translated into the kind of resume and professional skills that someone needs to advance in their career. And so those include critical thinking skills. And so many of the students coming into our program possess that critical thinking understanding. Part of our job, I think, in the classes is to take that, sometimes almost like an intrinsic ability to think critically, and turn it into a professional skill. But a student applying to the program, when they write their application essay, I think wants to try to reflect that and show it. And it doesn't always have to be shown in a classroom setting. Critical thinking skills are used throughout one's life, in the classroom and also outside the classroom. But I think those critical thinking skills are the centerpiece of the graduate program, because they can be applied in so many ways. Part of what students learn, I think, is to take things like their writing skills, which are incredibly important, and to professionalize them, to develop them, to take them from wherever they were and to make them better. The writing skills are so incredibly important in so many sectors, public as well as private. So the writing skills are another very, very big one. Basic reading skills, I think, are really, really important. And it's the area where a prospective student can improve most prior to starting the program. Regular reading, regular critical reading is the best way to prepare for graduate school. It doesn't take very much other than picking up a newspaper virtually online every day and reading for a half an hour about what's happening in New York City, what's happening in Julius's office, what's happening in the mayor's office, what's happening to the people of the city. I think every student who wants to succeed in our program would be well served to read the newspaper of your choosing, whatever it is, every single day for 15 to 30 minutes, and you will be so well prepared for the critical thinking, for the analysis, for an understanding of the critical problems of New York City and how public sector employees work to solve those problems. I think those are the things that I look for in a student. It's those things that I think the program looks for in students, and it's things that I think our students have in enormous amounts.
That's great. So the message here is you need to start reading newspapers. I know we like to scroll the TikToks, but newspapers still are useful. So I will advise everybody to read it. Mr. Julius, if we are about the last minute, so I want you to advise for future graduates, people who are leaving. What do you think people are looking for the graduates? What skills do you advise for the graduates will be ready if somebody come to you to be interviewed? What are you looking for the new people who are graduating from our programs?
That's a great question, and I would definitely echo what Professor Brown has said. That reading and writing is fundamental. Like I work in my position. Excuse me. Even though I do business and economic development, and that can be interpreted in many different ways, but a lot of it is really just reading and writing. Right? We have to read and write. I constantly get tagged in different reports that we're creating or paper. At the drop of a dime, I have to be able to write and emails back and forth. Right? Like I have to be clear and concise and be able to get across information in a meaningful way and a digestible way. So totally agree. Reading and writing, those skills are crucial. I would also, echo. Well, I would also just say, really being. You have to be, and this sounds basic, but you kind of have to be likable, right? And I say that I don't want to just give that as just a broad thing. But when I say likable, you have to be, when people are working with you, they have to be able to say, all right, is this person going to give me a hard time? Am I going to, especially if they're going to be, if you are their subordinate, and it goes the other way. If you're interviewing it for a job and your potential supervisor or director, you could tell personalities may clash. Is that an environment that you want to work in? So likability, and you can kind of interpret that for what it is. It doesn't mean that you have to be inauthentic or fake, but you do have to understand that when you are entering into a professional environment, you have to add that level of professionalism. You have to be able to read the room correctly, and know and pick your spots, pick your moments. There are times that you have to put your foot down and say, hey, these are my boundaries. I don't want to cross them. I have to leave at this time. I have to take a vacation time. That's understandable. But that doesn't also mean I'm going to come in here and just do whatever I want, right? So I would say that. So likability, reading the room, these are, I know I'm kind of simplifying these topics because just we don't have a lot of time, but I would add those along with the reading and the writing and the public speaking. Those skills are necessary.
Wow, all related with communication and networking, all the skills that you and Professor Brown are commenting right now. The importance of that connection with others. That's key, even to enter to the program or to leave the program. Dr. Heath, what would be your advice for new students?
My advice is to really engage other students. And I mean that not just for the students who will be taking classes on campus, for which it's obvious, somebody sitting next to you, introduce yourself. That's obvious. Every student knows that. But we also have a lot of online classes, and they're excellent. I think that sometimes we think that an online class means we're taking it alone. Building connections in the online space is an incredibly important thing for students to do. It's an important skill that will only grow over time. How you build confidence, trust, a relationship with coworkers, people that report to you, people you report to in a virtual environment, in an environment where you may be working remotely, I think is incredibly important. And it's something that a student can develop while they're in the program, because many of our students are going to take an online class or two, maybe even more than that. That doesn't mean you can't connect with other students. You find other ways. You set up a Zoom call, you set up a phone call, you set up other ways so that you can build that camaraderie that you don't have to sacrifice just because you're taking an online class. And so that's something that I would want to reinforce to every student who's saying, well, I imagine that I'll be taking a lot of these classes at home, so that doesn't really count for me. I'd say that's not true. You don't have to sacrifice that because you're taking an online class. In fact, it could be something that could be really beneficial to developing that skill more in the future.
Thank you very much. Julius, one last word before we leaving. Thank you for everything. Thank you, Professor Brown.
Oh, absolutely. No, I just want
online classes or not? Did you have online classes when you were here or only in person?
No, I think I might have done one online class, but for the most part, it was in person.
All right.
Yeah. But no, thank you for this. Thank you.
Thank you for everything, and thank you for all this information for our prospective students and students who are leaving. Is very helpful. Thank you, Julius. Thank you, Professor Brown, and I will see you next week in another Graduate Power.
All right, take care. Bye.